Hi, my name is Dale, and I want to welcome you to my channel, Observer of Anomalous Objects. I'm so excited that you're here. Go ahead and don't forget to hit the like button and also to subscribe if you haven't done that already. I'm going to go ahead and bring on my co-host. This is Rob Heatherly. Rob, why don't you just real quick, for some new people that might be in our audience, just go ahead and tell people a little bit about yourself.
My latest antics, I've been assisting with investigating disclosure, researching. I'm on the channel with my best friend Shannon Scott with the Military Witnesses to UAP, which we've had some health issues this year, so it's been a little quiet, but we hope to remedy that soon. Prior to that, I was an engineer, but forced into medical retirement. So I'm using what I've learned there and applying it to researching the phenomena and helping people bring government disclosure and accountability for it with what they're concealing.
Is that the podcast you're talking about right there? I put it up there.
Yes.
It's a military
That's
witness
it.
UAP.
And I was with Thomas West for about a year and a half.
That was disclosure tonight, correct? Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to bring in our special
with Thomas
guest.
Before that for about a year and a half.
Okay. We're going to bring in our special guest right now, Matt Laslo. Matt, just want to welcome you to the podcast. I just want you to know I'm very excited that you're here because I'm so excited for the next 2 weeks because today we're going to get a perspective from a reporter who's got, boots on the ground. He's there in DC. He's talking to the senators and to the representative. And so you're going to be able to give us a great perspective. And then just to let everybody know, next week, we're going to have Stephen Bassett on. And so he's going to give us a different perspective of what's going on, especially with the UAP Disclosure Act. And so we're going to get a couple different vantage points. And none of us are there. None of us that are, watching other than like Matt and some of the people who are living there in DC. Most of us can't afford the money, at least for somebody living in Oregon. I can't
afford it either.
All right. I want to put you on real quick, Matt. I'm going to just mention some of the things that I pulled off of your bio. I'm pretty excited because one of the things that you did is you got a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University. And that's pretty awesome. It's a master's in government program. But that's not all. You're not just a reporter. You're also an adjunct professor for Johns Hopkins University. And when did you start that? In 2016?
Yeah, I've been teaching at Johns Hopkins since 16 after wrapping up my MA. And then there, so I actually teach more like poli-sci. So I teach like history of the media, history of rhetoric with an eye towards how rhetoric has adapted to new mediums over time. I'm also a Wired magazine contributor. So I guess I'm a tech guy. Even though I'm getting older, so I'm needing everyone else to help me out with my tech these days, which is freaking embarrassing.
Well, I'll tell you what, I had to start from the ground up, and if I didn't have people helping me, I definitely wouldn't be here right now. And so, and I think I'm guessing I'm a little bit older than you. I'm 61, so I know I'm older than you. And so for a guy my age, we didn't grow up with the internet. We didn't grow up with all this tech, and so we had to basically learn it. But it just shows you that we can all do that. If we put the effort to it. Rob's going to have some questions for you, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and start with a couple that I have. And specifically, I want to deal with the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act. What it's called is the UAPDA, but that's what it stands for in case anybody's wondering. But my first question for you, Matt, and I'm going to go ahead and put you back on full screen again. Do you believe it was a win or a loss for us?
See, that's where I'm bad at questions like that because I always try to keep my distance from the legislative process. Like my first tattoo is tabula rasa, blank slate. Like I don't really believe in objectivity or that we can access objectivity here on this earth. So it's more aspirational, my reminder to myself to stay a blank slate as a reporter. And it's interesting because even within the UAP caucus, you've had disagreement on what exactly Schumer's UAP amendment would do. Matt Gaetz and Burchett and the others were opposed on some things. Especially the critique is that, wait, this UAP amendment and this version of disclosure is based on the JFK um,
Model.
disclosure, if anyone wants to call it that. And a lot of people are like, what? There's still a lot of conspiracies and confusion and questions about the JFK
Exactly.
nation. So why are you mirroring this legislation off that? But then proponents like Senator Mike Rounds, who's the lead Republican co-author with Senator Schumer on the measure, Rounds says, hey, he's just glad that, they moved it forward a little bit. And like many things in Washington, once you kind of get your foot in that door and are able to open it up a crack, it's usually pretty hard to shut that door. So even though members of the UAP caucus are feeling kind of burned as they head home for the holidays because they, definitely got screwed here, they are, they can rest. They can find a little hope and optimism in the fact that, hey, they opened the door a crack and now they're vowing, like last night on askapol.com, I dropped our new exclusive with Congresswoman Luna, and she goes, yeah, we're starting to battle for next year's NDAA to, refine and even strengthen this amendment. So we'll see. That battle was just lost, but now there's just started.
We made progress, in other words, and I appreciate that. But let's go over what we lost. What were the things that we lost? We know that eminent domain was lost. And so what else did we lose as far as what we were trying to get or what the Schumer Rounds Amendment was trying to get for us?
But this is the interesting thing, because even going up and talking to a lot of Schumer's co-authors, they weren't quite sure what the changes meant. And even, because these are classified topics, me as a reporter, pressing all these lawmakers on it, I've never really been able to get a good understanding of what they really envisioned, both the board that was initially there and then the eminent domain. I'm so curious what they thought of that this summer when I pressed Rounds on the measure. What does it use? It uses that term non-human intelligence, I believe.
Yeah, NHI multiple times.
Used it around 20 or so times. Well, when I was talking to Senator Rounds, because again, I'm a Wired magazine contributor, talking to Rounds, I was like, wait, it sounds like that definition could even include AI, artificial intelligence. And he was like, yes, it could. Or he was slipperier than that, being like, well, maybe it could. And so that's where I'm curious with the lawmakers or their staffers who were drafting that specific language, because now we're learning that, yeah, there were debates about the jot and tittle of that measure. And so some of those debates were just on the definitions of what that stuff meant. And so I think Congress kind of showed us that they weren't 100% ready for prime time, in this space. It was new to a lot of them. And even they only set up Arrow, the UAP investigative unit within the Pentagon. So the Pentagon's UAP hub or whatever, they only set that up a couple of years ago. And so that's where you're kind of seeing, especially with senators, most of them are pretty frustrated that Kirkpatrick is leaving, even though they weren't happy with him. They're like, hey, this guy was just setting this thing up. And so, yeah,
so even some of those that support the disclosure were upset with Kirkpatrick for leaving and not sticking it out and trying to get everything in order.
Well, most people are like, good riddance. What the fuck did you do? My French. But then you have Gillibrand. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat from New York. she kind of had the best relationship, I would say, with Kirkpatrick. She was applying pressure to him because they were hearing from so many whistleblowers, current and active and veterans or alumni of the government or intel community. They've been hearing from so many whistleblowers who want to tell their stories, but who do not trust Arrow and do not trust um, the systems they have in place to protect them. So it was interesting. Like Gillibrand met one on one with him, then Rounds met one on one with him, then the chair of the Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, he told me that him and his vice chair, Marco Rubio from Florida, that they met with Kirkpatrick, all of them pressing him on this, the whistleblower issue. That's a lot of time that these senators put in to a guy who just threw in the towel after not even doing the job. And so there's a lot more frustration with Kirkpatrick than anything else. But I hadn't talked to any members who met with the new guy who's replacing him. So he's
Wait and see.
he's a wild card. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts.
Concerning Gillibrand,
I was going to say something, Rob. Can you hold your thought for a second,
with
Rob?
Gillibrand, yeah.
Okay. What I was going to hitch is I wanted to piggyback on what you said. I think you're absolutely right, Matt. I did a podcast right after the second hearing, the one in the Senate, and I felt like Senator Gillibrand was setting him up for success by giving him the power and the authority to be able to do. And I even had a clip I played where you could just almost see him sighing because he couldn't answer. And so I had high hopes, honestly, for Kirkpatrick. And I honestly felt like there was a great working relationship there, that there was some kind of connection between them two. And so I agree with you 100% on that. Now we get to Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick has made some statements that people I know that have talked to him, like Mario Woods, who clearly gave him evidence of extraterrestrial things, and he just get up, there's no evidence. That's one of the reasons that people are afraid to go to Arrow, because they go and tell him, and it's like, well, they just dismiss what they say, and it's not like credible, and so they're circumventing Arrow, and they're going to senators and stuff like that. Rob, I'm sorry for cutting you off. You want to go ahead and ask?
It's so weird to have Kirkpatrick come out, after David Grush testified on Capitol Hill, to then have like the head of an agency go out of his way to, like a little kid on the playground, like just give him that nudge, or like a little kid on the NFL field. Like that was just
LinkedIn
petty.
account, wasn't it? That was his LinkedIn account, wasn't it?
And you don't see like as much as the right hates Secretary Buttigieg or G or whatever his name is over at Transportation, like they don't hate him for being petty. And like, after someone testifies and says, hey, Transportation Department did really bad here, but Buttigieg isn't going to his Facebook and like ripping the person. So it just kind of shows a level of unprofessionalism from Kirkpatrick that is alarming to me as a Congress watcher.
Did he resign or was he forced out? That's a big question.
I haven't heard that he was forced out. I haven't had that confirmed.
Because he made some mistakes, just like you mentioned.
Well, I could see the Pentagon, the top brass, wanting him out, or the intel community wanting to boot him out, because he even, for what he did, that academic work where he speculated about, extraterrestrial life. So I could see them wanting him out. And I could see him wanting to throw in the towel because his constituency with the UAP Bureau is the UAP caucus. Every agency kind of has their own constituency within Congress. So people on the Transportation Committee, like Buttigieg or whatever, has to kiss their asses. Why did I pick him as the example? He's got the worst name.
Yeah.
But, so, the Pentagon, they have to kind of serve the people on Armed Services Committee and Intelligence Committee because they know they're going to get grilled by those people. And so Kirkpatrick, like there was kind of this built in, like having to basically go to the principal's office, except he's supposed to be the principal in this metaphor, but having these four big dogs from the intelligence committees on Capitol Hill and Gillibranded Rounds, they're both also on the Armed Services Committee, along with being on intelligence committees. So they all met privately with him basically to spank him. So I can see him, having hundreds of these things flying over U.S. airspace that he has not proven that they can quantify yet. Between that, and then him pissing off his congressional constituency, like there was no love for that guy in this town.
He's getting hit from both sides. He probably did just say, "Hey, I've had enough. I'll go back into my own field, and get out of the spotlight." And Rob, what was it that you were going to ask before I cut you off? I apologize.
I was going to say, well, I'll start with the end and roll back a little. Kirkpatrick, after he came out and stated that he had tried to contact Grush a few times by phone and email, and then he came out, David, publicly stating that was categorically a lie. They couldn't produce the records to show that they had made an attempt, which they would keep that in perpetuity capacity. So I think with the heat that was brought onto him and finding out he was already forecasting to go to Oak Ridge and another private LLC that he had opened up, they already knew that he was heading out the door. And then with all the scrutiny that he brought with that last gaffe that he did, I think that expedited his retirement a month early, maybe. It's kind of what I'm guessing. But with Gillibrand, it was interesting that she was all for full disclosure until she took all these briefings and found out that there was more there than she realized. And I think somebody had spooked her into complacency to be a lot more cautious about disclosure, probably under the guise of national security interests. So they didn't. She toned it way back and dialed it way back. And with Kirkpatrick, they drugged that office out for over a year to get it stood up. And then to get it out from the office that Lou Elizondo worked for with Susan Go, that's riding the clutch on the facts. So it was basically inept. And anything Kirkpatrick himself did not take a briefing on officially from his team, like what some of the witnesses that we've heard from told, where they testified to some of his crew, if they didn't brief him on it officially, he has deniable plausibility where he can honestly say, I have seen no evidence of extraterrestrial vehicles or biologicals, because he wouldn't take a briefing on it. That would give him an out to state that and not be lying. And then Susan Go stated that no, Kirkpatrick was not working for ORNL, never has. Well, that statement was true, but she knew the essence of the question was if he is going to work for them. But she answered no, he's never worked for them and is really. Well, she didn't say anything about the future. So technically she didn't lie, but those are weasel words by omission that she lied.
Hey, I've been in Washington 17 years. I'm used to lying liars and their weasel words. It's interesting, going back to the first point you made about Kirsten Gillibrand, she has been interesting because when I first talked to her back in either June or July about this issue, which was kind of fresh after the Grush IG report, the weight and gravitas of that was really kind of just like still hitting a lot of lawmakers on Capitol Hill. She was one of the first. Her and Rubio were two of the first to really jump on it, especially David Grush's second claim. Because if you remember, his first claim is that, hey, the government's recovered craft, it's there. His second claim is that there are these SAPs, or special access programs, that the executive branch is actively hiding from Congress. And that is what really enlivened both Gillibrand and Rubio, like me, like them. We're all congressional junkies. Like, I wouldn't want to be a White House correspondent.
You got to realize, though, with
Yeah.
with these SAP programs, they're throwing all these aerospace companies softball projects and recovered materials, and they've gotten rich over the last 80 years since at least Roswell, going back to where it's given them unfair business advantages. And these people, the congressmen, are seeing lost revenues when they have aerospace corporations in their districts that aren't read in and allowed access, but other districts are, and they've profited hugely with the money and the power. Mostly, I think what they're fighting for in the background isn't so much the disclosure that NHI exists. I think this bill takes care of that at face value. But as far as the disclosure for dollars part, they are not wanting to roll this out under the guise of national security, but they don't want to disrupt the power and the money and influence. And people have been killed to protect this program, as we've seen. How far up the chain are they willing to take that? Because they won't even release the Kennedy files, and he was wanting to go full disclosure with NHI and UAP. So you can kind of start doing the math from there.
Well, so back to what I was saying with Gillibrand and with Marco Rubio, who was the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, they came on really hot and heavy in June and July when Grush's testimony was first reverberating through Capitol Hill. And then, like, because Gillibrand, she told me, she goes, I want to meet with Grush and I want him to answer my questions, privately, but then I want him to answer my questions publicly too, which, in other words, in Washington speak, that's called a congressional hearing. So that's what she came out of the gates wanting that. And then since then, she said, like, well, there's been problems getting Grush. He wants us to pay for his flight and stuff, which then he said no. And even she didn't seem
No,
to
there's no
know
problem
when
with him
he was
financing.
already
He
in
stated that.
DC. As I was saying, she didn't seem to know when he was already in DC testifying on the other side of the Capitol in the House Oversight Committee, which I'm sure if she had reached out and asked, they could have found some time for him to meet with a sitting U.S. Senator who was, very passionate about his cause, at least initially.
I think her staffers dropped the ball on that.
I don't speak.
I think her staffers gave her bad information.
Yeah, it could be staffers. That's speculation. I don't deal with speculation. I deal with what I'm told and what I know.
Didn't her staffers meet with him in 11 hours of testimony?
Well, and again with Gillibrand, I just talked to her here at the end of this session or the end of this legislative year, right after the NDAA passed, and it was interesting because she wasn't even really familiar with the changes that were made to her own amendment. Don't forget that Schumer amendment, that UAP amendment, to get it to sail through the Senate. What Schumer did is he got, broad bipartisan support on there. So there were 6 sponsors, original sponsors. On the Democratic side, that was Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, and then Martin Heinrich, a Democrat from New Mexico. On the Republican side, it was actually led or spearheaded by Republican Senator Mike Rounds, but then they also just tacked Senator Marco Rubio, the vice chair of Intel, onto it. Rubio told me he was never a part of any negotiations on that UAP amendment, but he signed on as an original co-sponsor. Again, that's because Schumer just wanted to flash to the entire Senate. Look how broad this bipartisan support is. And so then they also had
I think
Ted
in
Young,
the House, once it was passed,
Indiana senator, on that measure as well. And so all of those, what we kind of found out, the way that NDAA worked itself out is, of those 6 senators signed on to Schumer's UAP measure, 4 of them didn't really matter. 4 of them had no knowledge of what was going on. You could kind of say that as well for Senator Mike Rounds, but he was in as much of those negotiations as he could be, but he was also cut out at a certain level. We know it was only Schumer in there from what we know now. And so that's what we're kind of trying to figure out, whether it was House Intelligence, namely its chair, Mike Turner, and ranking member Jim Himes, whether they were the ones who wanted the drastic changes, to the UAP measure or whether it came from the intelligence
It was
community inside the executive branch.
Yeah. Just a question, because you mentioned
the push by
Gillibrand,
the intelligence community.
but let's take
Well,
one at a time.
I know they oppose it,
I heard
but
it was
think about it on a different level. There's one Senate majority leader, and it's Chuck fucking Schumer. And his name was attached to one UAP amendment, and it was gutted in front of his face. So I don't know. From my reporting, what I know about Mike Turner is he's not that powerful. But I also know we have new dynamics. There's a new speaker in town. And so I'm curious. Again, I don't have a name. I don't know where it came from, but somewhere behind the closed doors, the most powerful Senate Democrat, and actually, no, the most powerful senator got screwed to his face. And so I'm still exploring how that happened. Because no matter what the issue is, that's as the president would say, that's a BFD. That's a big fucking deal. And so I'm also curious, again, back to what you said at first there, about Gillibrand and the others kind of cooling off here as the legislative year rolled on. Because, like in my last interview with Gillibrand, which we just published on askapol.com, I believe last week, I tell Gillibrand, because she doesn't really have any news for me on her own UAP amendment, which is astonishing. Then I tell her, hey, it feels like the mood's changed on the issue related to the crush stuff. And she says, how do you see it change? She gets real defensive. And I go, it's just that there's less interest. There's not much of an investigation going on over here, it doesn't seem. And she responds, no. And then she goes, I need to look into it. I need to figure out what's going on. So
I was going to say, Matt, a lot of people feel
that's
like
not true.
Senator Gillibrand has disengaged. There's a lot of people that are saying that, and it has that feel. The fact that she wasn't as involved in that, the amendment makes a lot of people wonder. I don't know. I'm not trying to say one way or another. I'm just saying that's what I'm hearing from people on X, that they just don't feel like she's as engaged as she was, before. And now all of a sudden, and so the big speculation is, which is a terrible thing, because you open something like that up, people can take it anywhere. Is it what Rob said?
Bear out from my reporting on her. But the interesting thing is, even though she's really cooled off on the issue, as far as my reporting goes, she's still the number one UAP advocate. She's still the number one UAP investigator in the Senate.
Yeah.
And that's saying a lot.
What about Rubio?
There's two factors to what Gillibrand was supposed to do.
Look at our latest stuff with Rubio. Rubio also didn't know anything about his own measure.
Okay. That's concerning. Rob, what were you saying?
That's your Congress, y'all.
I'm saying Gillibrand had two tasks. Gillibrand said that she was going to do two things. She was going to support the disclosure, but she was also going to ensure that David Grush's ICIG report was investigated to find out what the evidence is and draw it to its logical conclusion, and take legal action where it's needed, because the illegal SAP programs, they provided evidence that people have been killed to protect the program that is technically illegal because there's no congressional oversight of the money spent for it. There are certain programs I hear that can authorize the use of deadly force under the guise of national security, but we're dealing with an unauthorized SAP here. And a lot of the legislation and things and the pressure, I think, came from the intelligence community, squarely under Rogers, Himes, and Turner, to block the shot. You don't get to the top in the Senate and the House without making some concessions along the way. And I feel like they had some markers pulled in, good or bad, that caused some previously for to now be not for it so much, and just kind of let it get diluted. So I think they were kind of compromised in some way. in various ways with different people. I mean, I'm sure it's different from each person, but the base result is the same.
I mean, that bears out.
They
I
plan on this
I
amendment,
interviewed these
and they're not
senators.
pushing for the
So what
investigation.
you're saying is based on my reporting, and yeah, that's what I've seen from my reporting. But that's also why I'm continuing to press these people. In my last interaction with Senator Mark Warner, the chair of the Intel community, he kind of like rushed past me to get into a meeting, and I, playfully was like, "Hey, I'll give you a pass this time." But yeah, these days when Rubio sees me, when Gillibrand sees me, uh, Rounds, Warner, they kind of get a little like, "Oh shit, he's gonna ask me, and I haven't done my homework." So it is important to keep their feet to the fire, and especially the strange thing. If you look at our post on Ask a Poll before the NDAA passed the Senate, I talked to all 5 of Schumer's co-sponsors in a 2-day period, and none of them had a seat at the table. None of them knew what was happening, so everyone kind of got cut out. It'll be interesting going forward because then remember, you have the Congressional UAP caucus in the House. Now, those folks, at least some of them, had no clue that there was even a Senate UAP amendment within the NDAA. But I told Congressman Burleson, and then his eyes perked up, and he's like, "Oh, we're going to have to fight for that." So this is where, again, this Congress is new. Some of these members are very new, and so they're kind of learning as they go. So as much as it was painful for many in the UFO community, watching the shit show that was these past couple weeks. I don't know. I don't have any grace or patience with lawmakers, but it's kind of like watching kids, fumble with their training wheels. So we'll see if they can get up and ride the tricycle.
You start, Rob. Go ahead.
Well, there's 2 issues here that I see. There's 2 issues here that I see. One is the support for the NDAA 2024 Schumer legislation, but the other is ensuring that what David Grush set out to do in the first place was to get his. I don't see anyone championing that now. That's kind of went underground. They did issue a statement that they were doing everything but they didn't use the word investigate in their exclusion of what they're not doing through the ICIG. They didn't. They said they weren't doing anything, but they accept that they didn't state that they weren't investigating it. So they made it look like they're not. But you don't have any Congress out there stumping for that now to get to the bottom of it. Because if he's lying, he goes to jail. So why would he lie under oath if it weren't true?
Right, true. So some of what you said there is accurate, some wasn't. So when Congress gets back, right now they're on a 3-week recess. They come back, a week after New Year's Eve. And from what we know, what we've reported at askapol.com is that the House UAP caucus, the Congressional UAP caucus, has been granted approval to now review David Grush's initial Inspector General report in a skiff. So they're going to be able to review it in a skiff. We don't 100% know what that's going to look like, whether there's actually going to be folks from the Intel community there that they can bounce questions off of. It seems like it's more going to be they can just go in, read it, not really discuss it with anyone. But then what those members tell me is important is after they read that, then the next meeting they have with folks from the Intel, Pentagon, NASA, Department of Energy, because they're very excited for one to finally get to see and hear it in Grush's own words. Because if you remember that July hearing in the House side in front of oversight, about half of what Grush said was, "Sorry guys, can't talk about that here publicly. I have answers, but it has to be in a classified setting." And so, and if you remember coming out of that, you had folks like Congressman Jamie Raskin, top Democrat on oversight, ran one of the Trump impeachment hearings. Well, he came out of that being like, "Hey, I still have a lot of questions. We need to have this classified meeting in the skip. So it'll be interesting to see what those members get out of that,
Well,
and where it goes from there. And then the other X factor in the House is how much Speaker Johnson um, allows the UAP caucus. Because if he allows them to have the select committee, well, then that could be a potential game changer. So yeah, while there's not really much of any of a UAP investigation going on in the Senate, well, actually, so on that, what Rubio last told me is that the Senate Intelligence Committee isn't going to interfere with the ongoing Inspector General investigation. That kind of felt to me like a change in what he had told us at askapol.com back in June and July, where he was like, hey, he told us, he told News Nation, he was demanding answers. So he kind of cooled down a little bit. But what he told me the last we spoke on this a few weeks back, he said, he said, we're waiting for them to wrap up. He's like, we don't want to interfere with their report and their investigation. And that's where it confused me, even though I've been covering Congress 17 years now, and even though I'm a professor at a handful of top schools, the place still confuses me sometimes. And so he was saying,
what about,
it kind of sounded like it might be a separate Inspector General report, or maybe a fuller one still coming out on Grush. Again, questions I have, not answers.
Rob, I want to clarify one thing
Well-
before you ask your question. You're saying that we're definitely getting a skiff. Was it that the House that's going to go select members of the House that will be going in the skip about a week after New Year's? You're confirming
House
that.
Congressional Caucus, we broke the news at askapol.com that it was January 12th is when it's scheduled for. The last week Congress was in. Congressman Burchett told me it was on the 6th, but I have a calendar over here. I don't even think they're in on. Yeah, they're not even in on the 6th. The 6th is Saturday, so I think he misspoke then. But so there was a little end of year confusion there, but I do have it confirmed that it's been greenlit for the Congressional UAP Caucus to, in a classified setting, get to review David Grush's initial Inspector General report, his initial complaint to the intelligence community.
Okay.
And what they hope to get out of that is, again, they want sharp arrows. Right now, they're like, hey, we don't have much ammo to shoot because we don't know what programs to ask about. We don't know what locations to ask about because that's all classified. And so they're hoping to come out of that with, some really heavy, weighty, and pointed questions for these
Hopefully
secret
loaded
people.
for bear. Hopefully loaded for bear. That's what we want to see. They come out with, the locations and stuff like that. And if nothing else, maybe they can get David Grush and an actual
itching for it. Each one of them on the UAP thing, I think all of them, and they don't swear. I swear a lot. My two grandmas taught me to curse in the Midwest. But all, like, half of the UAP caucus was like, what happened with the NDAA is it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. That's what Luna told us. That's what Burchett told us. Burleson. So yeah.
When Rob gets done with this question, I want to get your perspective of Schumer. You said basically they just gutted it, and right in front of his face, the most powerful man in the Senate. I want to, after Rob asks this question, I want you to hold on to that and kind of tell me what did that do to Schumer? Is that going to fire him up? Is that going to make him more proactive as far as trying to help us get disclosure? But you can answer that after you ask Rob's. I just want that sitting in the back of your mind while you answer Rob's.
That's so mean. How dare you plant the seed of
so
Schumer's face in my mind? What are you saying, Rob?
You had stated that the congressman came out of the July 26th hearing with David Grush wanting answers, and they couldn't get a skiff. We need to go back and look at the context of when David Grush stated that he gave 11 hours of classified testimony. in a skiff, and that only staffers and staff lawyers showed up to ask to take that briefing. That who had access to that briefing and who refused to show up? You know, because I think there was a lot of information that didn't go into a vacuum that should still be available. They can go back into a skiff and review that, I would think,
available
to ascertain what that what
it's not available to us. I mean, so remember, everyone, this
no,
is
not to us.
classified stuff we're talking about. And so
The
with it
senators
being classified, there's a veil of secrecy that the government's going to put up around it. So what we know is Senate intelligence staffers, Warner staffers, Rubio staffers, and potentially other member staffers, they're the ones. House might have also done it, but the Senate staffers sat down with them and briefed them and got all those questions answered over the hours and hours.
Didn't they take notes?
But they were stating they wanted answers after the hearing to get a skiff. Can't they go back and review that to get clearance?
Well, so I've covered this for Wired Magazine, just like protocol for skiffs. Because if you remember, the end of last year to the start of 2023, you had former President Trump, FBI raiding his place, former Vice President Pence, classified documents found at his place, current President Biden, classified documents found at his place. And when I went and talked to all these senators about that, they were just so like, politicians, they're all gonna lie. I interview 535 liars for a living. So like, you have to always understand that politicians are gonna sweet talk, they're gonna wiggle. As you said, they're gonna be weaselly. But you can kind of tell every once in a while when they're genuine. And that was one where, you could just tell they weren't bullshitting on that one.
Okay, you can answer that.
So, and then back to it, in the skiff. And so, all those members of the intelligence committee, they were like astounded because they're like, how can you even physically get a document out of the skiff? Like, if they take notes in the skiff, those notes stay there with that presumably armed guard. There's an armed guard outside one entrance, but then there's other staffers in there, it seems. I'm not sure if those notes get ripped up, or actually, no, I do know this. Each senator, it seems, has a folder or a cubicle or something inside there that can keep their materials. But the whole sense I got from most lawmakers is they don't want to touch that stuff. And so I could see none of them really wanting to take notes. It could be a lot different with their staffs. So I'm curious. Actually, that is a good question for me to ask.
If they're not on the register for showing up.
Yeah, that's what Rob was actually asking. Why can't they go into the skiff if they got clearance? If their aides and stuff could go in there and write, if they did, like you said, maybe they didn't, but if they did, and it's still in the skiff in a folder with their name on it, and they have the clearance, why can't they come in there and then read and find out what David Grush said?
But no one's saying that they haven't read all of that. No one says that they weren't already briefed on all of that. They're the head of the intelligence committees in the Senate. So there's some things that, let me put it this way. There's a lot of things. So me as a congressional reporter, 17 years, I'm going to my grave with a ton of secrets in me. Those members of the intelligence committee, they're going to their graves with a whole lot more secrets. And then especially the chair and the vice chair. And so, especially with the younger members, when I first started asking about Grush, you could tell that they didn't even want
it. Theme here.
What's that?
We seem to have a recurring theme in the Congress and the DOD, deniable plausibility, where if we seem to have a recurring theme with deniable plausibility in Congress and the White House and the DOD, that if they don't show up and get their name on the roster as being officially briefed on a particular particular account or narrative, like showing up for the skip. If they send a staffer, they could then claim that, well, my staffer didn't brief me on that. Or if they took a report through Arrow and didn't brief Kirkpatrick on it himself, then he has deniable plausibility. It seems to be a lot of that going around. We had that with Bray and Moultrie before that, where they're all saying, I don't know, I don't have a clue. None of them have been briefed. I think that is by design, so they have deniable plausibility, so nobody has to be accountable, and they're not caught lying.
That theory works for me.
Okay. What about Schumer? Let's get back to Schumer. I want to find out. You said they gutted it. It was kind of be like a slap in the face, a major one. So what's this going to do to him? Is this going to make him back off, or is it going to make him fight harder?
Well, so let's take a couple steps back. So remember, Schumer's really new to this topic.
Yeah.
The reason his office confirmed this to me, the reason he's at the helm on that UAP amendment had nothing to do with David Grush, is what his office told me. Nothing to do with David Grush. What Schumer intended with his UAP amendment was to fulfill the promise he made to his predecessor, Harry Reid of Nevada, who was a champion on this issue. And I'm still curious, and I need to kind of get Schumer one-on-one, which is fairly impossible because he's always got a big entourage and security detail. But I'm curious how much Harry Reid either opened his eyes to the issue or whether he's literally like, oh, I just got to do this for my friend. So that's where it'll be interesting going forward to see whether Schumer comes out with an amendment to his amendment in the next NDAA, or even, and I've been meaning to ask him this, like, hey, what did you think of Grush's testimony in the House? Again, he's always surrounded by an entourage, and there's always international news breaking, so there's other reporters there too. So I just haven't gotten him at the right moment for this, but I'm curious from which angle he's coming at this from now, especially because once he took over for Reid, well, hey, then he's part of the Gang of Eight, which is four leaders, House and Senate, Republican, Democrat, and then the four heads of the intelligence committees in Congress. So that can make even those leaders very circumspect, because when you are read in on top secret stuff, like classified stuff, that has made some of the members nervous about talking. But again, I need to pigeonhole Schumer on that. Now, as far as what happened, like, it is pretty remarkable. Well, so yeah, Schumer's amendment was gutted. We also have to remember this is the first time really in history where this must pass bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, like on paper, if they don't pass that, our military can't do anything starting January 1st. Now, our military, and they ain't going to sit down because Congress didn't do their homework. But so that NDAA, this time in the House, which is controlled by Republicans, remember, they got completely larded up with abortion language. What is it? The diversity, equity, and inclusion, that stuff. All these, very, very hyper partisan measures got thrown into that, which usually that doesn't happen because it's a very bipartisan and broadly bipartisan measure that usually both parties want to stay very focused just on service members. And so Schumer did have a ton of stuff to negotiate. Well, let's put it this way. When they went in there to negotiate, Republicans had a huge pile of stuff that they wanted, that their members really care about, that the members ran on, and that they passed. Um, Schumer, because they did the more traditional measure, he didn't have a ton of extra, progressive lard in there that he could barter with. And so I'm curious what the contours of those negotiations were. Whether Schumer just went in there and said, hey, all that stuff is just gone. Well, that's hard to sell in a House of Representatives that just shut itself down and that can barely fund the government. There's only a 3 vote margin that Republicans have had. They can only lose 3 Republicans in that chamber on any measure. It's going to be even less than that now that former Speaker McCarthy
Didn't
resigned.
Mitch McConnell help kill some of this legislation by coming out and helping encourage the gutting of it with Hines, Turner, and Rogers?
I haven't heard McConnell much in this, which makes me have a ton of questions about McConnell because his eyes and ears are everywhere, and he's also Gang of Eight, which is why it was curious to me that he was so quiet.
He was one of them that pushed to water it down.
Is there from a Washington point of view? Is that what you're hearing or not hearing? That McConnell?
That's what I'm saying. That's just pure speculation because the 5 members,
not entirely,
5 co-sponsors on Schumer's bill, Young, Heinrich, Browns, Gillibrand, that other guy, maybe Rubio, all 5 of them weren't really a part of those negotiations. So
what about Carson?
None of that could point to McConnell. Like what? When it comes to cannabis policy, which I've covered for Playboy, Rolling Stone, and Vice, well, we always knew it was Senator Tom Cotton who was holding up cannabis reform. Well, I have that proven. I've got that confirmed. Here,
of the devil.
McConnell's name never came up with the 5 original sponsors of Schumer's measure. And so, again, I'm asking questions and trying to uncover the truth, but in my reporting and asking the 5 co-authors, McConnell's name never came up, which McConnell is a strategician, which isn't a word. He's strategic and he's powerful. And so, even his silence is sometimes deafening. And so, my eyes on him, but right now, no one's pointed in his direction.
Let me ask you a question then, because you made a comment earlier that
saying goodbye. I got to run in a minute, but
okay. Well, let me ask this one last question then. You said that it was bigger than Mike Turner, that you didn't think he had the power by himself to shut this down, which makes a lot of people wonder if there isn't, who's really running the country. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here, but there's a lot of money that goes into these politicians' funds. And so is it the contractors, the private contractors? Are they secretly behind this? Is it the Pentagon? Is it the DOD? Because you yourself said that you believe it was bigger than Mike Turner and Mike Rogers and Mike Johnson. Yeah.
Well, and that's where, again, I'm just filled with questions, and I think it'll actually be good to have this holiday period because lawmakers were getting fairly annoyed always seeing me. So now I'm going to give them 3 weeks away from me, and then I'm going to be that fucking thorn in their side every day because they have to answer a lot of these questions. And the fact that they're not even, so this is what I would say. What I've sensed in the past few months is just an utter lack of curiosity amongst these members. And there's not skepticism. Like, I always assume the government's lying to me. That's just my cynical start. But it's cynicism grounded in reality. And pardon me. I'm so glad I sneezed because I was feeling that for 10 minutes now.
It's over with now.
So I'm curious at the start of the new year, and this is where I do ping pong UAP caucus off the Senate Intel folks because I'll be like, hey, did you hear this over there? And so the interesting thing is, ranking Democrat on House Intel, Jim Himes, who I've covered for years. I think I've covered Congress longer than he's been in Congress, and for his local station, WSHU in Fairfield, Connecticut. And so he knows me. And he's been aggressively dismissive of the
Oh, wow.
issue. He's also got a ton of military contractors in his state and district. And so I'm curious how he uh, got so self-righteously like indignant. Like he just won't even, he just bats away
Can't
any
even ask the
question on
question.
the topic, which
Yeah.
is so curious. And then now at the end of the year, when I hear, oh, House Intel, and that it might have been Himes as well pushing back, I've got a lot of questions for Himes and Turner. The shitty thing about Turner, who, again, I've covered him for his local NPR stations in Ohio. So when I try to interview him now in the hallway, and we published this at askapol.com, he was like, nice to me. He's like, hey, how are you? And then he goes, or then I asked him about this topic, UFOs, and he goes, I don't do ambush questions in the hallway.
Oh my
Well,
goodness.
so then I did a long post at Askapol exploring all of the defense and aerospace donations he's gotten over the years. And remember, he's Ohio, so he represents Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I'm
Lockheed
curious
Martin.
exactly where he is on this. But so he won't talk to me because I'm MSM, and like then I lit him up in a very, very fiery blog post because I'm literally like, dude, you used to talk to me all the time 10 years ago. Or no, not even. I didn't want to talk to you a bunch 10 years ago. You were available, but you're just some vanilla Ohio guy. And so now that you shot up and got all this power, I'm wondering how many cocks you suck to get where you're at. And so Turner, he's dubious to me, so I
Turner,
have to go
Turner was
around
a
him. Turner don't even believe Turner. If you
Well,
see
that's
him, he's got like pristine, like pressed. He's got like a couple $1,000 suits on. Like he's totally a swamp creature.
Turner,
Um, so I'm curious because like what we've heard and what they've kind of portrayed is indifference. Like they don't really give a shit, and like these UAP caucus folks are doing this, and so that's where now at the end of the year when you hear they were trying to exert pressure behind closed doors, well, I'm not allowed behind closed doors, so now I'm going to exert some pressure face to face
right.
because it feels like they haven't quite been honest with me. Again, with Turner, he's not going to answer my questions, but hopefully our friends at News Nation or a spot like Fox News, hopefully they start actually asking good questions because he goes on those shows presuming they're friendly to him, but I know reporters there that aren't going to
Um,
kiss his ass. So we'll
which is a
see.
question I had. I never got to ask you, and I think you answered it. How much of this is political theater and how much of it is sincere? And how do you answer that question?
That's the thing. I don't think we know yet. And I think one thing with Congress is what Democrats really cared about healthcare, and they really cared about passing some sort of like quasi universal healthcare. It took them 100 years to fall short of that goal.
Wow.
So even though and Obamacare is like fairly crappy, and so like they want to fix parts of it, and so it took them 100 years to deliver part of their promise and like a bad delivery.
Version
And
of it. Yeah,
so
that version.
with this issue, that's where I do give lawmakers some space. Sometimes I'm a fucking thorn in their ass. Um, so it's curious, especially at the start of the new year, and actually having the House UAP caucus being able to review the Grush stuff right off the bat, that could be a game changer. Again, it's classified information in a classified setting, so that really sucks for all of us without clearances. But it'll be interesting to watch what they can do with that and whether that changes the conversation. Um, because that's one thing the House UAP caucus can do. They can kind of force this issue onto the Senate's lap. It's interesting that what happened at the end of this year is it was the opposite of that. You had the Senate taking the lead, even though the Senate was fairly indifferent on the issue. And so, again, to like circle all the way back to where we started, I'm still curious on what they meant with some of that language in that initial Schumer UAP measure, eminent domain, etc., non-human
I've got some answers for that.
intelligence. Yeah, so I'm going into the new year with lots of questions in my notebooks and lots of blank white space.
Well, I know we're running out of time, but I did want one more question. Are we going to get any more hearings? Are we going to get any more hearings in 2024? And where will they be coming from if we do? Will it be the House or the Senate?
That goes. It seems like it'd be the House. They were still promised another one, but that promise, I believe, came from McCarthy. And so McCarthy, I believe, had just promised them one. And that's what Burchett told me, like, hey, we're going to get one shot at this next one. But it's a new house because Speaker Johnson's new, and what members have been telling me on different issues, members who care about crypto, boom, if you're the first person to get Speaker Johnson's ear, especially because he's got such a slim majority, if he knows that X lawmaker is passionate about Y issue, well, boom, he's going to tell them to their face and he's going to promise things, hopefully, as the good Christian boy he is, he's not going to be lying to different members. So you want to get to him first. And that's where Burchett, a few weeks back, said he was able to breach this topic with Speaker Johnson and that he was open to it and that he, was supportive of their efforts. So it'll be intriguing. I forget the exactly what he said, but that interview's at askapol.com, one of our more recent Tim Burchett exclusives. But Burchett definitely felt like Speaker Johnson was going to allow them to have more leeway with this. What that looks like, those are the millions of question marks that will hopefully be answered in 2024.
Well, people were saying, and I don't know if something changed, but we were supposed to get a hearing in the Senate. And so what you're telling me now is if there is one, it'll be in the House, not the Senate.
Well, so there could be one in the Senate. Again, Rubio said they're not really doing an investigation right now. They're waiting for the IG to wrap up theirs. Okay. And Gillibrand, she might have one, depending on what Arrow reports. The last Arrow report that came out in the fall was kind of a big nothing burger. And so there was no real reason to have a hearing based off that. And so, depending on, this is kind of the catch-22. Congress, because they set up Arrow as their brain trust on UAPs, Congress is kind of as shitty as Arrow is. It's like if Arrow does better work, then Congress is going to have better information. If Arrow is neutered, then Congress is neutered. And so that is why there's starting to be more chatter about removing Arrow from the umbrella of the Pentagon, which is something Senator Rounds brought up to me, and others seem open to it.
Well, one thing about it, if you look at the 3 hearings, there's no question the third one was the best. And that was by bringing witnesses or whistleblowers in. So why aren't they doing that? Or are they planning on doing that? Because to me, that was the most meaningful one. I think. What's that?
They did that with Grush and Graves and all that.
There's a
they
whole
did that.
bunch. There's a whole bunch more coming up that supposedly have firsthand knowledge. So why wouldn't you bring them up?
Well, and so this is something you have to take up with those members. And there's disagreement on it. I think with a lot of the members of the UAP caucus, they don't, they're not trying, like they're already convinced. And so, at least what Burchett has argued is no, we don't need to bring in more whistleblowers. We need to bring in the top brass and start exposing where the lies are at and where the dam is,
Go to
the
the
executive
source.
branch. And so we'll see. There definitely is that tension between how much do they have to lay out the case versus how much oversight do they have to do to dislodge the knowledge that's out there. But that's a them problem. My job is to throw stones at glass houses for a living. And with that, I got to go throw stones.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate it, Matt. Have a
Thanks
good
for
one.
having me on.
All right. Bye.